At this time, I ask you silence any electronic devices you may have. And if you choose to come up and speak to the council, we have some sheets in the very back. Look like they're yellow and green in the back wall. Fill one of those out, get it to city clerk, and she'll get it to me, and I'll call you up when we have public comments. In the very back of the wall by the door. This time you would all stand. We'll engage in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Councilwoman Brown.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have a full quorum this evening. And anybody have any objections to what's on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, it's approved. And we will move right into the presentation from the city staff concerning Chapter 6 of the Code of Ordinance.
Okay, Mayor and Council and public, obviously what we're here to discuss tonight is Chapter 6 of the City of Crestview's Code of Ordinances, and specifically how it addresses the use and consumption of alcohol within the city limits. For tonight's presentation, it is a workshop. The purpose of this is for us to be able to have open discussion amongst the council members and amongst the public in an effort to try to determine what is the best direction for the city moving forward. So the format that's been laid out for this evening is as follows, and if the council has consensus, we'll continue with it. What I'd like to do first is I'd like to overview the actual ordinance as it sits right now. As we work our way through the PowerPoint presentation, I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I want to cover some of the points that are in our Code of Ordinances. As I mentioned the last time we had this discussion, this is not something that I was interested in taking up, obviously, this earlier in my tenure. It just, unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation where we have to make some decisions. It's important that the council understands and that the public understands that we can draft legal ordinances to do what you would like to do, but I have to draft legal ordinances to do that. And so as we walk through, I'm going to explain to you a couple of things that are of issue inside of our current code, the reasons that we're having this conversation today. Then beyond that, there's who do we want to be as a community and how do we want to address the things that are in there. So we'll walk through it. Ms. Betsy's going to help me as she puts it up on the slide. So hopefully you all will be able to see it as we run it. It is the same thing that was in our presentation that we posted last Friday, I believe. So, Ms. Roy, if you'll go ahead and change the slide. All right, so first we're going to look at the current situation. Right now, the city of Crestview has set within section 6.6 of our Code of Ordinances the hours of sale for alcohol. And basically, it's a pretty standard format. It says Monday through Sunday, 7 a.m. to 4 a.m. Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 4 a.m. The following morning, which is wide open. And then on Sundays from 1 p.m. to 4 a.m. the following morning, except that in eating places and restaurants that regularly serve full meals, 10 a.m. until 4 a.m. For the following morning. As we look at our Code of Ordinances, I would like to make sure that this is how we want that language to read. In most places, what Section 2 is trying to refer to is that, or my expectation is that it implies that it is a bona fide restaurant. But the way it reads right now is if it's an eating place. So if they serve any food at all, then they can serve alcohol starting at 10 in the morning on a Sunday. That's legal, but I just want to make sure that we understand that that's what our code says as it sits right now. It does not require it to be a bona fide restaurant, which has some size requirements and things like that according to the statute. So, but as far as that's concerned, that's what's currently in there. Moving to the next slide. This is what actually prompts some of the primary conversation for today. Section 6.7 deals with the distance restrictions for bottle clubs and etc. And their certificates of compliance. So what it says, as we look at these slides, the sections that you see in bold and underline, first of all, If it's bolded, underlined, or in color, those are for the purpose of this presentation. That's not how it is in the code. But those are, because there's a lot of words we're going to be going through tonight, I want to make sure that we draw attention to the things that need to be drawn attention to. So that we keep track. This is distances from a church. What it says within our code right now, it says that within 500 feet of any church, which is fine, that's something that's, that you could do. Then it goes into the section that's red, and it says, except a bona fide restaurant. Well, first of all, what it says is it shall be unlawful for any bottle club or private club to operate, or for any vendor or barter to sell, give away, exchange, or otherwise dispose of, in the nature of a gift or exchange, alcohol and intoxicating liquors for consumption on the premises, where sold, bartered, exchanged, given away, or disposed of, within 500 feet of a church. Something to pay attention to there is it doesn't say anything about bring your own. It just says that they can't give it away, expose it. So it can't come from the business itself. But it says within 500 feet of a church, which is legal. But then it goes on to say in red, except a bona fide restaurant may serve alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises, providing the owner of the property in which the church is located consents in writing to the issuance of a certificate of compliance. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in detail a little later on, but basically what this does is this assigns away the authority of the local jurisdiction to provide for compliance for the sale of alcohol to an agency other than the local government. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there's some case law that went all the way to the Supreme Court that specifically says that we can't assign that authority away. For a couple different reasons. But so we're going to have to do something with that. So Tim, what does that mean? That means that because that's been found to be unconstitutional as your executive officer, we can't enforce that. I'm not going to have staff enforce something that's been deemed to be unconstitutional. So that means that we just enforce the portion that says not within 500 feet. So based on this, I think the intent was to say, it's okay if you have a restaurant and you want to sell alcohol at that restaurant and you're close to a church, as long as the church doesn't care. But the long as the church doesn't care component of it is not legal. So now it just says that you can't do it within 500 feet of a church. Okay? And then if you go down to the underlined section, it says if any portion or parcel of the land in use is in use as a church or facility lies within such radius, then the church shall be deemed to be within such distances. The reason I highlighted that is as we start to flush out language, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. Right now it says you take a piece of property, say the mic's the property, and you put a circle around it that's 500-foot radius. When you put that circle around it, what our language says is if it clips any portion of the property that's owned by the church, then it's deemed to be the entire church. I have seen language that says, 500 foot from the door, 500. There's other ways that you can legally put that language in there. So the only reason I underline that box, there's nothing illegal about it or anything like that, but it just is a very strict way to interpret it or to enforce it, which is what's in our current code. So that's what 6.7 says right now. We'll come back a little bit later on and talk a little bit more about it, but is there any questions from the council right now? We'll open it up. Is there any questions from the council about what I just explained there? Okay. All right, so we're moving on to the next section. This one is distances from a school, and you'll see that there's a lot less highlighted on this one. It does say 500 foot from a school, which is compliant with state statute. But at the bottom, it says the Main Street Area Commercial Business District is exempt from these provisions. We cannot legally exempt them from state statute. So actually what we're doing in this case is the opposite kind of what we did in the other case, in that we're trying to make portions in our Main Street area less stringent than the state statute says. So we can't do that. Not the way that it's written. There are certain clauses and exemptions where you can do that, but I don't believe, in my professional opinion, I don't believe we meet any of them. It has to be in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the school, all kinds of things. So one of the reasons this is I want to make sure you know is because A, we're going to have to take that section out. And then B, it's important how we define a school. Our code defines schools a little bit more stringent than the statute does. So it's important that we define a school. All right, any questions about that section? All right. Moving on. In section C of the same section of the code, it deals with distances from a dwelling. And what it says in there is within 300 feet, it's the same, preamble basically. And then it says within 300 foot of any parcel of a property containing a dwelling or a residence, which that 300 foot is something we could do. It's just the first time I've ever seen it that way, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But then it goes on to say the red part, which says, unless 2/3 of the owners of the property within such 300 feet consent in writing to the issuance of a certificate of compliance. Again, this is assigning away the city's authority. You can either do or not do. We can write zoning and code to do, we could be a dry city if we want, but we can't say we don't have the guts to make the decision, we're gonna give it to somebody else to make. That's really kind of what this is doing. This is saying, hey, we're gonna let someone else determine whether this is the right place for it to be. Your zoning should do that. So you saw us put the concentric zoning districts earlier. You remember I stopped it for just a second and said, hey, this is where we've got commercial, and then we go to a mixed use, and then it goes to residential. Your zoning should address where businesses go based on the zoning. And then we have to still do, you'll find in their staff reports, compatibility tests. So we'll look at the properties and say, is it found to be substantially compatible with the business? Is the business found to be substantially compatible with what's going in beside it? That should address a situation like this. But either way, the red section has to come out because we can't assign that authority to them. Any questions on this? Okay. It does also exempt it inside the Main Street district, and does not deal with this. I don't believe deals with restaurants at all. So this just says 300 foot. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, it does. It says 300 foot.
Yeah.
In consent. The restaurant's in consent. So the thing I want you to remember with this is, one of the big questions that I get all the time is, why don't we have any Texas Longhorns? Why don't we have a Roadhouse? Why don't we have a Red Lobster? Why don't, those kind of things. The way this code is written, before somebody would come in and put a restaurant like a Texas Roadhouse, they would have to, if they were within this radius of the church or the residential property, they'd have to obtain this permission. And there's nothing in here that says that the church can't come in beside afterwards either. And so there's no, we deal with case law on that, but there's nothing in our code that prohibits it from going the other direction. So when we really start looking at these, it's important that we understand that these are talking about everything, including restaurants. And you'll see why that's important for what I'm going to point out later on. Any questions about the dwelling units or the residential properties? Okay, moving on. All right, then there's a section in our code that says distances from similar establishments. There's a section in there that says, however, this subsection shall not apply to those establishments which meet Florida Statute 562.202, which is the restaurants. This subsection also does not apply to establishments. Also does not apply to establishments the primary business of which is selling food for consumption on the premises, but which also serve alcohol and intoxicating liquors for consumption for the food, even though the establishments do not meet the criteria of 561.202. So basically what I think that is intended to mean is that if I put a hot dog stand inside my bar, then I can still put 2 bars within 500 feet. I think that's, Mr. Attorney, would you agree that's the way that reads?
Well, I think what it's intended to mean is the quota licenses where the food service establishment doesn't meet the square footage or
right.
seats. Yeah. So the example is right. It's a hot dog inside of a bar.
Right. So there's no minimum requirement for the food sale. That's what that 561.202 does in the statute. It says this is a real restaurant. So then they refer to it as a bona fide restaurant as the terminology that's often used. So what this section is saying is that we don't want establishments that sell alcohol, and because of the language in the blue there, it basically is probably honing in on bars because there's a lot of reference back to food stuff. So basically it's saying we don't want bars within 500 foot of each other, except and unless they sell some other kind of food for consumption on premises, maybe to soak up the alcohol. I'm not sure what the reason was, but that's what that says. So do we have any question?
about that? Other than once we start talking about this, I would sure love to clear that up. We either don't want them within 500 feet or we do. So I'd like
Of
to
each
clear it.
other, you mean?
Right.
Right. Well, we don't.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
and
it's not
that'll
good.
all get
Yeah.
fleshed out during this conversation, but the way this reads,
Yeah.
that's what that says.
Mhm.
All right. And then moving on to the next section. There's a ton of red up here. So basically what this says, so the state of Florida licenses the sale of alcohol. You as the city council determine where that business can occur inside your zoning districts. What this says is we've written a code that says where you can do that. And all that's fine and good, but if you meet every one of these requirements, you still have to come back to the council for an additional step. And there's a section in the statute, which I'll show you a little bit later on, that specifically says that you cannot regulate the licensing or the permitting of the sale of alcohol. You can regulate where it goes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So this whole section right here is not only, we need, my opinion as your city manager is, we need to write our code so that it's clear and people can comply with it.
Yes.
And when they do, they can do business.
Yeah, this
If we don't want them to sell alcohol, it'll be clear and they can comply with it and they won't do, but they don't need to come back here to get special permission for something.
Mm-hmm.
It opens up, there's a lot of reasons why, but it opens up, way too many chances for someone to challenge it, for us to end up in court. You let this person do it, but not this person do it, so on and so forth. So this whole piece of stuff right here, that's what you pay your staff for. Really, I think we should pull it. Plus, you can't have it as you setting an additional rule. So any type of language to try to work around this, I think is inappropriate. Would you agree with that?
I do. This came up earlier this summer with an issue in the city. We had the opportunity to research it. And to be clear, that the change was made by the state in 1997.
Right.
And this ordinance actually predated that. So yeah, it wasn't a situation where the city passed an ordinance that wasn't permissible. It was that the rules got changed after the ordinance was in place. And the ordinance was never changed to be an update.
All right. So that's the point of that. Any other questions on this section? Okay. All right, moving on. All right, so this is a continuation of that. This basically talks about how that occurs, who has the permission to make the statement to council, to try to tell you it's okay, and all of that kind of stuff, and the fee that's associated with it. So if it goes, it all should go, in my opinion. Moving on. This is an interesting piece too. Oh, you see that, Betsy? This is an interesting piece too, because what this says is that this is in that same thing. This talks about the permission to issue. So what will continue to happen without this, without the last two slides, what will continue to happen is when they go through the licensing process at the state level, they have to bring in a compliance form to the city. Then the planners will look at that and say it complies or does not comply with our local code, and they will sign it. All right. Or actually, the Community Development Services Director will sign it and they'll move on. They'll get their license, they'll open up. What this code section says is that if for some reason that the business is doing some sort of nuisance, that then we can pull that certificate back away from them. There's sections in our or will be sections in our code of ordinances that we can do through code enforcement. Maybe if somebody's, we may want to look at a noise ordinance or something like that. But to just leave this section open that basically says, because it doesn't even really specifically say what it is, just nuisances, public nuisances. Then it says the city council may revoke that certificate of compliance. Again, you can't issue it, so you shouldn't be revoking it. But the reason I've got it in here, and I want to talk a little bit about it is, if we do something different in our code, maybe we want to make sure that we address hours of operation or noise or something like that. It gives us the ability to do that, but we're never going to be able to revoke their license. The state does that. Okay?
We didn't issue it, we can't revoke it.
That's correct. Any questions on that? All right. To the next one. All right, this is this section, so sale of beer, off premises, all that stuff is normal. Going down to J, there's a section I have highlighted. it's just for thought while we're doing this. It says, however, if such use is discontinued for a period of 180 days or more, the provisions and prohibitions in this section shall apply. This shall not apply to prevent the continuance of a use and the restoration of a building if it's destroyed by 75%. Okay, so the point of this is comprehensive planning is your long-term plan. Zoning is your current plan to get you to your long-term plan. So actually, we have a perfect example. Steve talked today about a particular use that's not allowed in a zoning district that you all approved today, right? So that makes it what's called a non-conforming, an existing non-conformity. When we have an existing non-conformity, you can continue on forever, unless you go out for 180 days and then you can't come back. The reason I'm making sure we just notice that's the point there is because how strict you as an agency want to be to move yourself forward is how short you make that window. So in other words, if a business closes up and then it's a business that's not a conforming use, they have 180 days to fill it and reopen it in that same use, or that property loses its right to continue as a nonconformity. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, and the reason we're talking about it right now is because as you draft your whole ordinance, if you make changes to it, I want you to know what that does to, because right now you may have existing non-conform, I don't know this for sure, but you may have existing non-conformities where somebody's received a letter saying you could sell alcohol, but we know now that you can't under the current ordinance, the way that it sits. Does that make sense?
Will this also fall if that existing non-conform structure was sold?
Yes, you still have 180 days. It's the
180 days
use.
from the day that it was stopped being used as.
Yes.
This is specific to alcohol, but other provisions of the ordinance involve other businesses and other existing non-conforming uses, and I think it actually mirrors the 180 days.
It does. It does. But in this particular case, I wanted to make sure that that you understand it is relevant to what we're doing, because as you shift and move or there's potential that you could shift and move uses, and if you do that, you need to know how long they have to come back. So, and it's a common practice to, as a community matures or moves along, for example, I'll use Fort Walton because it's an example I'm familiar with. We had some changes for a while. There was a ton of tattoo studios and bars in our downtown district, and they decided at some point they wanted to change the direction of that. So they changed and put some distances between them, which is common. And then so they set this type of a timeline on it. So if that business closed, then another one wouldn't come in, and eventually they turned into a different type of business. And so that's when you would use this type of, it's a legal way to use zoning to push us down the road to where we want to be tomorrow.
Without it being a taking.
Without it being a taking, right, without taking away their right to do business. So, okay? All right. Moving on. Excuse me. Section 6.8, licenses subject to council approval. We beat this one pretty good.
We can't do
You
it.
can't do it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing it. I mean, I guess you can do anything until somebody challenges and sues us.
You can set in place the procedures they have to go through to get their business where they are, but you can't give them a liquor license.
Right. And you can't, and so like Peppers, for example, when I first started here or I was sitting in the audience applying for this job, one of the two, Peppers opened up, they got done doing all their work, they opened up, and they went like a week or so without the sale of alcohol, even though it was an allowable use inside their business until it got to the city council. So that's that. All right. You've already moved on. All right. So this is our special events permits. You all did quite a bit of work on this not too long ago. 16? Was it 2016?
Yeah, sounds right.
And so what this does, the only thing I would say in here is that, and actually there's a section in red that doesn't have to be read on there, where it says review and approval by the city council. Really and truly, the reason you did that is because before you didn't have somebody doing the job that I do, and so there wasn't anybody necessarily to coordinate all the different departments to then stamp and approve the permit application. while we're messing with this, it just makes sense to have you be clear in your direction on what you want, and then hold me accountable to make sure it's done. And that's what I'm here for. And then the last one on there says users must meet the security requirements as defined by city police department. This is something that I want to try to define a little bit, and work with Chief McCosker to figure out, is it a number of officers per event? I just want to make sure that we're clear on how that calculation works. But again, it's something that we should have in this policy, so that there's not a guess. So that, if there's one event, we have one officer, and then there's another event that's exactly the same number of people, but we have 50 officers. I just need to make sure we clear that up. Okay? Any questions on this section?
Yes, Tim, go back up to the mayor's office. We're gonna move that to your office?
I would suggest that we do.
I would
Yes,
too,
sir.
but-
I'm sure you would. It really is
No,
just
it makes
much
sense
more
to do that,
functioning.
yeah.
Yeah, especially because we really want to get to the point where, where we're walking people through to do the things that you've laid out that they can do. And so get all the way done, and then we stop and say, oh, and a lot of times what we find with events or any kind of permit is people do those once a year, or maybe once in a lifetime, and it gets so complicated they get behind. If it's in the authority of the city manager to get it done, we'll walk them through the process. I'll make sure they comply with the code, and I'll sign it. And if I don't, then you guys need to get somebody else to do my job. All right.
Tim, one other thing,
Yes, sir.
I like that where you remove from the mayor. Not that I don't have anything against the mayor, but sometimes he's floating around somewhere otherwhere, and and I can't sign it anyway because I'm not even up there, so it wouldn't matter. Nobody, if he's not here where it's written, somebody might miss out on an event if they say, "Oh, I forgot to get this to the mayor," and so I think that's a good point.
Yeah, there's several different things in our code that are that way. We'll get them worked out. Right now, I keep them on a pretty tight leash, but. So, all right, moving up. This just goes on to continue to talk about what we do during those types of events, whether it's a city-sponsored event or a public event, and really, there's nothing in here that's out of the ordinary from any type of an event that I've seen. It's actually written in such a way that we can, keep people in a certain place. Move up to the next one, Ms. Betts. It spells out what type of insurance they should have. All of these things are real common to places that have a main street where they would do these types of events. So there's nothing in any of these that I saw of any issue. The next, move on up. So it just talks about how the applicant's responsible for what goes on there. It talks about ensuring that people are of the legal age. It talks about them having bands on if they're going to be able to do that. That's an interesting one. I hadn't seen that before. Apparently you can get them because I saw one at Biketoberfest. So sounds good to me, and it helps the police officers to easily identify who has been vetted already. So again, all of this stuff I don't, unless the council or the public sees something with our special events component of it, other than maybe when we talk about the map a little bit later on. To me, it seems like a very functioning way to do business. So any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Where it says city functions, officially sponsored city functions, up a couple of slides, does that include what the Main Street organization does? They're not necessarily city functions.
Well, officially sponsored city functions, yes. I have been interpreting it to mean that, yes.
You understand what I'm talking
Yes,
about? Because
yes,
they
sir.
sponsor a lot of events on Main Street.
Right. And that in another way that I'm using that, which Chief McCosker loves, is on city functions. We're going to look at a way to work the policing out. So that, because what happens on events is the policing function of it becomes a pretty significant burden. And so by having city, I define it that way. If we officially sponsor the event, then it's a city sponsored event as well. Then we can do things like help out with the cost of the officers and that kind of stuff. Any other questions? All right. So moving to the section that says required changes. This is kind of a recap, but the section that we talked about at the very beginning, where it talked about, let me see. It shall be unlawful for any person to barter without first having made application to the city for a suitable, on a suitable blank form. So this is where they have to get additional approval from the city other than the licensed approval that we do. And then it goes on to say, or fails to comply with this chapter, the city council may revoke the certificate of compliance, and it goes on. If you look at the bottom, that's the section out of the Florida statute. It says a county or municipality may not enact any ordinance that regulates or prohibits those activities or business transactions of a licensed, regulated by the Division of Alcoholic Beverages and Tobacco beverage under the beverage law. So what that's saying is we can't enact any ordinances that further regulate, other than zoning, which is where can they do it. But this is not can you do it or not do it. This is can you do it here. You know, our zoning says it's allowed here, it's not allowed here under whatever terms you develop. This is saying that we put another step in the process for licensing that we think we can revoke later on. So that's why I believe that that must be removed. Would you like to address that?
Right. Hours of business and location of the place of business, sanitary regulations, and the actual type of entertainment or conduct permitted. You know what that means.
Those are the things that we can do.
Correct.
Right. Which is important. The type of activities that occur inside of a business that serves alcohol is important, because that's where people, a lot of times people think as soon as you attach or address or do anything with the alcohol ordinance, the next thing you know, you have what people refer to as a gentleman's club, which I've never seen a gentleman going in and out of either one, but that's what they like to call it. Well, the statute does still allow us to regulate the type of activities that can occur when the consumption of alcohol occurs, and there's no way we will allow it. Or not with me at the helm and you guys at the helm. So, all right, so any other questions on this section as to why we think that the additional licensing is not appropriate? Okay. Then moving on to the next one is section 6.7. This is where that distance is by a church and by the school and from the residents. Again, U.S. Supreme Court, Larkin versus Grindle, then discussed this in great detail. I actually have the report here where the Supreme Court found some very specific things. One of the reasons they said that it was inappropriate was because it was a violation of the Establishment Clause, but also it deals, which I personally kind of actually disagree with, but since I'm not on the Supreme Court, that doesn't really matter. But what it does say on there is it goes back to the same thing about assigning away our authority with no, to where it can be arbitrarily distributed. So and there's a lot of different sections in there. I'll provide that court case to you if you'd like, but it's pretty clear in there that you can't do that. And then the next one, I've already explained that to you. The statute has a 500-foot buffer. We can't waive that anyway. So we just need to be clear on what a school is, and it should match the statute. And then distances from a residence, that's that 300 foot again. That goes back to us being able, whether or not we can assign our authority, going back to the 1982 court case that heard that you could not do that. So, all right, so moving on to the next slide. And then I would like to, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay, maybe we'll open up if there's questions from either way, whichever way you want to handle it, but I'll be happy to answer any questions on the things we've talked about. But the decisions that we have to make is any of the conflicts that we find with the First Amendment or the Constitution must be ratified. We can't leave those in. I'm not going to enforce them anyway because they're not constitutional. I will also say during Councilman Rensich's town hall he had last Monday night, there were some discussions about some options, and then obviously we'll defer to you to do that. But some of that conversation was about removing the bona fide restaurants from the distance requirement, maybe expanding the business district, and then and or adjusting the distances to allow for growth and to create opportunity, and then removal of the distance restrictions that aren't required by state. So there was a multitude of levels to how much change we would consider in this. Again, for discussion, moving on to the next one. So when we talked about one of the items that came up quite a bit was, as you look at this ordinance, right now, I guess it was in 2016 or whenever you looked at this, is that when you set those red lines? Okay. So whenever the council put those red line that, or created this downtown Main Street district, they did it as that red line that you can see on the map right there. I'm not sure what drove those. I have no idea. I wasn't here, and I tried to look back and I couldn't find anything in the staff reports that would determine why those borders came up the way they did. So part of the conversation said, if we want to, if we maintain our distances, do we want to expand that overlay district in the downtown area? That would do a couple of things. If you keep the 500 foot in, it would push them away from the 56 churches that are in some of them are in downtown, but the majority of the churches are not. And so it would push them away from there and kind of focus growth in this downtown core. That's an option. But when we talked about it, Councilman Rinsich actually came into my office and said, hey, what would it look like? Should we do the whole CRA, all that kind of stuff? And so from a planning perspective solely, we looked at it and said, these two, there are 4 total pieces to our CRA. There's the initial, and then 3 different times the CRA borders were expanded. What you're looking at in that map in the yellow is the first CRA. The purple color is the second amendment. So it's not the first time we moved the border. The first time we moved the border was Twin Hills. And then there's also a strip that runs back down by the railway going the other direction. So Twin Hills is to the east. To the west, there is another finger that comes off of our CRA district. And when I sat down with Councilman Rinsich, what we talked about was, I definitely do not think we should remove, or if we're going to create this district, I don't think it should go to the Twin Hills side, and I don't think it should go back up into the neighborhood side. Even though in that neighborhood side, we have done some zoning changes which will allow that thing to change over time. I think the last thing you want is to remove the restriction inside that district and somebody open up tomorrow, especially as we look at, because we know now that you can't say that the residents gets an opportunity to decide. This is where we have to be responsible in our planning, I think. And so if we focus on this area, it stays all in the commercial area. And then later on, as that develops, if it develops into something else, you can revisit it. But this gives you a look at it saying, okay, we're going to take that district and put it on the initial CRA and the second expansion, which keeps it all in kind of that commercial district, and then avoids the park and avoids the more currently residential zone. So does that make any sense to you all? Do you have questions?
All right, I need to make a point. So
Sure.
The original CRA is the red, right?
No, the original CRA is the yellow.
The yellow. That's what I mean. But the red line around.
The red line in it is the current exemption district.
Okay.
So
what you're
inside
saying,
that exemption district, you can do anything, even schools and bars, which you can't legally do. But according to our code, you can. So
what we're proposing is to move the at least move the exemption all to the whole CRA district.
right. So that's I'll let Councilman Rinsich. That was that's his baby.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, the intent was to streamline the CRA and trying to grow the downtown and make it more walkable and make it to where more businesses come in. And having just that small little section, it really chokes off the potential that you have for all of Main Street. So by having the purple, which is the addition 2, and then CRA 1, that'll allow us to use the entire Main Street corridor, our entire downtown, to revitalize the downtown.
Right. And so, from staff's perspective, the reason we produced it in this map is, talking to Councilman Rinsich and understanding what he was trying to accomplish. These are predetermined lines. That being said, you can set that line anywhere you want to set it. So it doesn't have to mirror this. As you notice, the red lines didn't mirror it last time. If you wanted it to go from 90 to 85 and not go across 90, you could do that. If that was another conversation that we had. This is a workshop, so we're walking through all the different ideas. That was another conversation that we had. The box that's there right now, again, I'm not sure what went into that in particular, but I know that it really affects Alex, because what happens is he has property that's on that triangle that people want to rent, but what they can do inside that property is different than what they can do on the other side of that red line. And it's really doesn't make a lot of necessarily planning sense or geography sense. None of that makes, so that's why this conversation is open right now. Because we're talking again about, in this particular case, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in this particular case, we're talking about somebody who has opportunity to actually lease a building that we've wanted to see leased for a long time. So, any other questions about this before we move on?
If I may add, there is already a letter of intent for a business to move into town, which is a major gain for the community.
Yeah, and and it's really another one of the things that kind of drove this conversation, because that piece of property fell within that 500 foot. So, Miss Betsy, we go to the next slide. All right, so this is the current buffer. So people say, why would this matter? It's important, I think, to understand the statistics a little bit. There are currently 210 vacant commercial parcels that are zoned in such a way that they could have a restaurant on it that are subject to the buffers that are listed here. So they're either close to a school or close to a church or both, and they are then taken out of the equation for a restaurant that could serve alcohol or a bar, either one of the two. If you look at the affected area, so it's 210 commercial properties, it's 326 acres of land that is tied up because of, and that's using the circle that touches the edge of the parcel. It's 326 acres that are then commercial acres that are tied up because they buffer a church, and then another 88 acres because they buffer a school. And so this is the map that he originally asked me to put together. And this, I think, does a pretty good idea of just kind of showing all of those light green circles that are on there represent churches, the blue circles represent schools. So anyways, that gives you a point of reference. And I think we've got two other options he discussed at his meeting the other day. Miss Betsy, if you'll go to the next one. If you looked at 250-foot buffer from a school, that's what it would look like. It would drop the commercial properties down to 144, and it would drop the acres to 146 plus 88, because again, the schools don't change. And then if you went and matched option 3, which I don't know if it's good for us, but option 3 is to take churches out of the equation, and it would be 88 acres affected by schools and 35 properties. So again, there's a bunch of different ways. Miss Betsy, will you go back up to the current map for me? 2 slides up. Option 1. Oh, right there. Okay. So there, remember, as we open this for discussion, and I want to obviously open it up for questions. From this point, there's certain things we have to take out. But when we take out the ability for a church to approve next to it, which we're going to do, or I can't enforce, this is where we are. So what we do with it from here can vary however you want. You can leave it just like it is and say that those are complete, that there's nothing. I'll fix the language so that it says it is what it is, and it'll be like that. Or you can, one of the conversations was to take restaurants out of the equation. So match either what the state said, so if it's a restaurant, or you could word it so that if it's 51% of sales, restaurant-related sales, which is a little bit less stringent than the state statute, you take restaurants out of the equation, then restaurants could go into all those properties, but bars could not. So that's an option. Or you can do like those other 2 maps, reduce the buffer. So any combination of that is what you can do legally. What I'm hoping we do here is I'll answer questions from you all. We can hear from the public. Then again, I'll come up and answer, and I'll sit over there, but I'll address any questions as they come up. And then that way we can hopefully work together to how you want me to put this language together for you. All right, any questions?
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
When we talked about the pastor can give, do we have any establishments currently that fit that? You understand what my question is?
I do.
That are inside where there's not supposed to be, but the pastor of the local church has said it's okay.
Right.
Because if we take that out of there, then those are then not bona fide?
I don't have that answer. I apologize.
But you follow my question?
It should have been an answer I had, but I don't have it. I don't know if there are any that currently are subject to that.
Okay. The same thing with the compliance issue from the council. If we take that out, or
Right.
there's some establishments out there that are living on that compliance that we've given before, then now we take off.
It'll be two different things. If there is one where the church has actually there was at a time, I don't know if it's still open. There's a church that's in a property actually that one went away when you guys put the border in. There was a church that Mr. Wingard had owned property on downtown that he had signed the letter for, but I don't think it matters anymore because it's inside of the exemption district. So any of those signed letters that were out, until we were challenged, I wouldn't do anything with until you made a decision.
Well, I'm just trying to get the impact.
Yeah, the impact would be they would be existing nonconformities because they received the letter. Then when they went into business,
The
they
law
would fall into
changed.
that.
The ordinances, the law changed, so therefore they're grandfathered in until they make some.
The certificate of compliance, we just will do away with. If they're licensed by the state, they're licensed.
I can add to that.
Sure.
What the state asks for from the city is a signature that affirms that the location complies with zoning requirements for the sale of alcoholic beverages or wholesale tobacco products, and you have to list the specific license. That's the only thing that the state mandates a proposed licensee have. Typically, that's been done by the council, but I think that's essentially what the state is saying you should not be able to do. That's more of a staff function of it either meets the zoning or it doesn't.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is the way our current code is written, it allows the council to then revoke it. So it implies more than just compliance. I mean,
No, that's the problem, right?
Right. That's what creates the problem. Because you could say, you could continue to say you want to review every application. You could say that. I think you could get challenged, but you could say that. But the problem in the code is that it calls it a certificate of compliance that you have the authority to revoke. So it's implying that you've given them some additional licensing that they didn't have already.
So our job is to establish the zoning
And then let me enforce it.
and then enforce it from that point.
Yes,
We don't have control over the license, that's a state issue.
that's correct.
All we can do is decide where they can be or where they can't be.
And what they
Based
can
on
do
zoning.
inside there while they're drinking.
And the
Correct.
hours.
And the hours that they
Yeah,
operate.
the hours and what they do inside. Yeah,
Right, yeah, like at the beginning, our hours of operation, all that stuff is legal. There's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor. Okay, so with me looking at this, only thing I see where it might be controversy, because some of the things we got to change them by law, is the buffer zone. And I think that's the main, is gonna be the main conversation, is that buffer zone. And what are we looking for, or how's it gonna affect the people within that buffer zone? That's the main thing that I'm looking at.
That's correct. I would say that that's correct. Correct. The rest of it becomes procedural, but I want to make sure you understand what all we're talking about. All right. Any other questions for me before I yield? All right.
No, thank you, Jim. I'm not going to open this up to comments from the audience. Madam Clerk, do you have any? Anybody in the audience who filled out a card and didn't get it to the city clerk would like to speak? We need to have it up here, sir. You can just give it to me, straight to me. One second, hand. Reverend Vale, come on up if you would. And I'll take them directly.
Okay, thank you for
I'm going to give you, state your name and address. I'm going to give you, typically we limit presentations to 3 minutes, but this is a workshop. We'll be fairly lenient if you take more than 3 minutes. If you would address the whole council, don't address one particular. You've been up here before. And thank you for coming.
And I promise I won't take up an offering or anything after.
All right, I'm going to hold you to that now.
Actually, I wrote out mostly what I want to say so that I don't get out of hand. I'm a little fuzzy still on what's going on, but my understanding is that there's a 500 buffer zone from anything that serves alcohol and a church. Is that correct?
Ordinance says it at this time. What we'll do is I'll allow you to direct the question to city manager, but that
And you're
currently is what our
considering
ordinance says.
changing or reducing that distance?
Right, because Yes.
Okay,
Just to make sure we're on the same page, there's two conversations being had. There is currently a 500-foot buffer. When you read the language in the code the way that it's written, it implies that it would give some leniency if there was a restaurant in place, as long as the church was okay with it. That's the portion that has to come out. So when that comes out, we have to decide, do restaurants stay in or go out? And then does the buffer stay, the buffer can stay the same. That's or does it shrink or all that? That's for them to decide. But what we have to talk about is, I need to make sure everyone understands that I can't allow you to write a letter for somebody besides you because it's unconstitutional.
okay. Well, personally, I'm not opposed to a Texas Roadhouse or Olive Garden or something like that. My concern is that, and I don't want to patronize you, but I just want to tell you where I'm coming from and where people in my church are coming from, okay? My grandfather is dead because of alcoholism. My brother, who's 8 years younger than me, he's dead because of alcoholism. When I was growing up, my next door neighbor, James Turner, he's dead because he had a wife and 3 children, but he went to a local bar, got into a fight over a woman, he got shot and killed. My other next door neighbor on the other side of where I grew up, his wife gave him a hard time and said she wanted a divorce, so he moved into a little apartment. A day later, became intoxicated and took a shotgun and wired it such a way that he could blow his head off. So I know a little bit about alcoholism. I'm not concerned that you're going to have a lot of problems with alcoholism and drunks and things like that from a major restaurant. My concern is that if you reduce the distance from 500 yards to something less, you may have bars move in, okay? You may have bars move in, and then you'll have guys coming in from the military on Saturday night, Friday night, and people getting drunk or something like that. I don't want to see that happen. And one reason is because we know alcoholism destroys families, it destroys lives or whatever. I'm not going to even go through that. I've got a whole thing here from Brookings Institute that was talking about the dangers of alcoholism and drunkenness. But in I won't even read the whole list. There's a long list of churches where people come into a church and start shooting up people and killing people. And that's happening more and more and more. And I've been to several workshops with Sheriff Ashley and Crestview Police Department and other places. Pastors are encouraged to come so that we can develop security for our churches so that somebody's not going to come in and start shooting things up. Now, my concern is if we have a shorter distance between, say, a bar. Okay, if Cashmore has this all-male review, you have a shorter distance between a bar and a church, there's a greater likelihood of somebody getting plastered and then coming into a church sometimes and start shooting people. I don't want to see that happen. I think if you look at the priorities, the overall priorities of a city, what's more important, churches and schools or businesses that serve alcohol, especially bars. So I think when you have bars, you're going to eventually have people want to open up gentlemen's places or whatever they call them. So I just ruined my whole speech.
You got your point.
I didn't even read it.
You made your point.
But I hope that the desire to make a lot of money off of hard liquor doesn't overrule the value of our schools and our churches. Now, I was here in 2016 when you were discussing open containers on Main Street and all that, and I was opposed to that. I know Nathan Boyles was in here, and he made the open admission behind this microphone that he wanted to open a high-end brewery on Main Street. We already have a legal moonshine still, and we already have places serving alcohol right now. And I don't think the moonshine still has made a big difference in the economy of our city. I don't think different restaurants like Beef O'Brady's or Azteca or whatever, I don't think their location has improved the shopping centers that they're in. I don't see a big positive thing that's happened as a result. Now, if you want to have Texas Roadhouse come, that's great. But I just personally I'm opposed to reducing that buffer from 500 yards to something else and then have bars come in, because I think that's what you're going to end up getting on Main Street. You're not going to get high-end restaurants on Main Street. I think you're going to get more prone to get more bars and things on Main Street. I don't want to see that happen, and my church doesn't see that happen. I have pastor friends who don't want to see that happen. And so in closing, I just say the churches in our community and the schools in our community, that's what's really valuable. And when people get into alcoholism and become alcoholics, we're the ones who have to straighten out the mess. I have people come to me who are, their marriages are falling apart because the husband's an alcoholic, and I have to minister to them and straighten out the mess, but yet we have bars that are just serving alcohol and causing problems in lots and lots and lots of families. And a lot of children are suffering because of that. So that's all I have to say. Thank y'all for letting me speak.
Thank you, Pastor.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
So, a lot of the focus was on bars itself, right? And so, there's several conversations at play here. I'm just wanting to get a feel for if restaurants are pulled out of that 500-foot buffer, is that a problem?
I don't have a problem.
I'm saying restaurants that serve alcohol.
Yeah, if they're
like-
pulled out of the buffer, what do you mean?
In other words,
They're allowed
if the
If
five,
they're allowed in.
well, I'm sorry, pulled out of the language so that they're allowed within that 500 foot. So
If it's
there's,
a legitimate restaurant, I don't want Cash More to come in selling hot dogs.
right, neither do I.
understand?
Neither do I. I don't want another cash one.
No, but if you have Olive Garden that's gonna come in 300 yards from the church, I don't have a problem with that. Because you're not gonna have as many people coming in getting plastered, they're eating meals or one having wine or something. But when you have hard liquor, and you have bars and everything, and then people coming in the evenings, you know, after the stores are closed, and they're getting drunk, and you're having beer bottles in the churchyard, and beer cans in the churchyard, and you have people fighting and all that, I don't wanna see that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page for
Okay.
that. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Bird? Holly Bird? To give your name and address, please.
I'm Holly Bird.
Maybe lower the mic just a little bit. Thank you.
I'm Holly Bird, 2330 Lewis Street here in Crestview. Is that it? I actually just had a question because I was confused. I didn't know if it was right now in the, I guess, I don't know, the ordinance, you know. If a church is within that, or kind of within that 500 feet buffer, are you saying that they can say it's okay if they think it's okay for a restaurant or a bar to be closer? Is that allowed right now?
It is in our current code, but it's not, but that particular ordinance has been found unconstitutional. So because of that, just like the cops can't enforce a law that's not legal, neither can my zoning staff. So even if you as a, you know, say it's your church and you're the pastor of the church, you write a letter that says that, you know, XYZ bar can be right next door, I couldn't accept that letter. So the code either needs to allow it or not allow it.
Okay.
And I think, you know, it was adopted here in 1983 is when that code came into effect here. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court decision was in 82. So somebody just didn't know it here. And so they've had that in place for some time, but it's not something that I will allow. So when I do that, if I take out, there's a thing called servability. So inside the code, if I take out the piece that's not legal, that means that nothing that serves alcohol can go within that 500 foot.
Okay.
And that's what brings that conversation. And that's why I was asking the pastor if, you know, so if we say restaurants inside there, I'd have to change the language, but then you would know that it's, that's the difference. Does that make sense?
But could it be changed? Is that what you're saying in the future? It could be changed possibly?
I'm saying that it can never be that the church has a say.
Okay.
That they get their say here. They can't have control over what the business beside them does, just like the business beside them can't have control over the church.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Anybody else in the audience would like to speak?
I saw some other cards going out. Please hand them up if you have them completed.
I'll just take it over here.
The mayor take them.
Thank you. Okay, look like Mike McDuffie.
Yes, sir.
You're on. Give name and
All
address,
right, sir.
please.
My name is Mike McDuffie, and my wife and I own the Wild Olive Restaurant. And the gentleman that was up before me, I certainly understand. My dad died from drinking, and my brother died from drinking, and I personally don't drink. And our restaurant has survived about 12 years, you know, not selling alcohol. And we do allow people to bring their own. But I do see a great benefit. I was glad to hear the gentleman before me say, kind of target bars, because I do see the detrimental effect to bars being in the buffer zone. However, in our restaurant, we've never, we allow people to bring their own beer and wine. We've never had any incidents regarding that. Never had any, we control that. The people that come in our restaurant are very professional and very responsible in the way that they handle that. And we have, as far as restaurants making an impact on our community, we feel, and I hope that, it's a shared opinion here. A lot of people that are in this room, we see at our restaurant. We feel like our restaurant has and continues to make a significant impact in Crestview, because we have people driving up from Destin, we have people driving from Pensacola, from Andalusia, from Dothan, Alabama, from a long way to come eat at our restaurant, because we feel it is a special place and we feel it does put Crestview on the map. So we hope, our hope would be, whether or not we would sell it, we would have to, my wife and I, we would have to commit that to prayer and make that decision with our family, but we would be very much in favor of having the opportunity to do that. And so if restaurants could be exempted from that law, I suppose, we would be very much pleased with that and in favor of that. And so anyway, I don't know if you have any questions for me, or if the council does, but anyway, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Did you have a question?
I would ask our legal counsel, can you, just so everybody in the audience knows, explain what a bona fide restaurant is? And the reason I say this and make sure everybody knows is we continue through this conversation, we have to be careful how we word them, because a food service establishment or a restaurant, and then the definition and how those two differ.
Right, so the state has a special license, that's what they call it, a special license for a food service establishment. And the requirements are that it has 2,500 square feet of service area and is equipped to serve meals to 150 people at one time, and derives at least 51% of its gross food and beverage revenue from the sale of food and non-alcoholic beverages.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, all that is 100% accurate. I want to be clear on something. You can go, as a council, you can go anywhere between, like what council is referring to is what does it take to get that specialty license at the state level. How we define what is considered to be a restaurant in Crestview can be how we define it. So it's not going to help them get a different license. They're still going to have to get that license.
Well, so that's the difference between a quota license and a special license, though. If it's a quota license, like your typical package store, you would not need the special license. So what you put in your ordinance is still important on that level. How do you define a food service establishment that's not trying to get a special license if they already have a quota license?
Right. So that we're on the same page, and so we understand what I'm saying here. Because the statute allows it to be within any distance. The city code could actually say that we only allow beer and wine licenses within that distance. The city code could say we can choose what type of activity occurs within that space. So if somebody has a license to do a bar, but you want to require that they also serve food, you can do that. The state's going to determine the type of license, whether they sell enough food or not. Is that a correct statement?
Well, if it involves the quota license, but they're hard to get and very expensive.
Right. So the point is, so the conversation of I think a high-end brew pub, somebody mentioned a high-end brew pub comes up. If they want to, you all have to decide, or can decide, that you will, if your concern is hard liquor, okay, you can determine whether or not you allow a beer and wine licensed business to go within that 500 foot, or to go within the exemption district, or a bar, or you can decide those things. Am I correct?
Correct.
Right, so we cannot be less stringent than the state, but you can be different tiers of more stringent. And the reason that becomes an issue is because, or the reason it needs to be a part of this conversation is because if you're talking about a business that's downtown and for some reason it does not fall within the exempt area and the square footage is less than 2,500 feet, you're gonna have to determine whether or not it's allowed. Now, the state will determine whether they can sell the booze or not. You're just gonna have to determine whether they can get licensed for it. Once they get properly licensed, you can determine whether or not they can distribute it inside your border or inside your zoning district. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's the,
So
that's the
we don't
location.
have to, and I think it's important that we understand that we can stay to their borders. We don't have to stay to their borders. I just wanna write the code clear.
The reason I want to bring that up is just to make sure that we aren't cutting ourselves short with our small restaurants like Mr. McDuffie had mentioned Wild Olive, that being under the 2,500 square feet or the 150, seat count, stuff of that nature. We just got to make sure we're paying attention to that as we develop this.
Right. And so if they were to obtain a license to serve alcohol from the state, whatever that form of license is, then you guys would have to determine, is that restaurant big enough to do it or not? You follow what I'm saying? And please correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan.
I think that's right.
I'm pretty sure it is.
I think Mr. Hayes was next, and I'll get you.
Yeah, that's a point, that I'm aware of, because I was born in this area, I moved around quite a bit, my dad being military. And the original Crestview, I would say, well, not the original, Crestview, what I grew up in, at the time was real limited borders. And I'd have to get it from you, the percentage of people that stay within, I think it probably hit Mr. Blocker and probably my district mainly.
Right.
The other ones would be basically where it's not affecting, because of the subdivisions that have been built that way and the way they're built and the coding that was set up with them. So it basically is between Mr. Blocker and myself area like that. And I realized back in the days how expensive liquor-likers were, super expensive. Not that I wanted to buy any, but I knew in our area the places that were down there were beer and wine and under the counter. I'm gonna tell you facts. It was under the counter stuff, but they're gone. So but that's where it was back in the days. And I realized that looking back at the past, that there were certain areas, and mainly it was this area right here, what we're looking at, the CRA district, and a little bit on other side of 90, but it wasn't too much on 90 if I can recall. And that was the area, and I stayed across the track mainly, and there were some areas that had beer and wine and behind the counter and under wherever they had it at. My granddad in Panama City sold moonshine, but he hid it out in the middle of the streets for the revenuers.
Let's stay focused here. Let's not go to Panama City, okay?
But the point I'm trying to look at is, I'm trying to look at for our entire citizens.
Right.
I can imagine how certain areas might feel, but then I have to look at the whole Crestview, and that's what I'm weighing on. I know what the thing is with the buffer. I know that's where it's going to come at is the buffer distance. The other things what you explained about, we can restrict it to the beer and the wine, and I don't know how many people get drunk off beer and wine, but it's probably minimal because the alcohol content in beer is what, 3 point?
And it depends on the beer.
Yeah, it depends on it. Unless you go overseas, it's 12.5. But that's the issue that I want to bring out to the citizens. Those are some of the things I'm gonna have to look at. I'm gonna need feedback from them before we go. But I'm sure that they'll be talking to all of us on that. But especially me and Mr. Blocker.
Sure. So, are we still on the same page? Were you doing some more research? No, Mr. Holloway. Okay. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that because I think, as I've said from the very beginning and from when you hired me to do this job and when you went through strategic planning, protecting the character of Crestview is super important to all of us. Mm-hmm. And so, we don't want to talk about Crestview in the old days because they gave me the tour and pointed out this. I don't want to see anything. So we want to, this is a super important conversation because we want to, like we talked about earlier with comprehensive planning is your long range and zoning is your how do we get there now? And then that's what all this is about. And so figuring out how it best fits Crestview's character. That's what we're aiming at.
And how to steer it.
I want to go to Councilman LaBeouf before we go back to the public. Go ahead.
Yeah, the one point that I would like clarification on is, as we're going through this process, it would be beneficial to me, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not up on all these things, is some sort of a listing of the types of licenses that are out there, hard liquor license, but wine, whatever it is, and all the criteria, so that when we go to the wording of how we want to put this, and we want to do exclusions or not, then we're using the correct terminology for what that business that we want in those areas are or aren't. Because I don't know a hard liquor license from a soft liquor license, don't know what soft liquor is, but whatever that is, I don't know what the correct wording would be. And so I don't want to get to what we had before, which is some nebulous wording that no one really knew what it was, and so wasn't enforceable by anybody. I want to have the correct terminology so that when we write the new ordinances, it is enforceable, it's legal, it's understandable, and it's uniform across the whole board. So I need to know what the proper wording would be. I guess that would be from the legal counsel, I'm not sure, but from somebody, I need that proper terminology to be able to put in there. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I think so, and let me work with you afterwards on it, but I think we'll probably do a little chart that shows you 4 cop, 5 cop, 6 cop, 7 cop, what they call those licenses.
Exactly, because they're all different, and I don't know what they are.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may respond.
Yeah, go ahead.
That'd be good.
The reason, Councilman LaBeouf, I did not do that today is because it is super complicated. And so it's already a complicated subject. So how I had envisioned walking us through this process is, tell me the land of tomorrow. What do you want it to look like? And then the attorney, and we'll get the spreadsheet to you guys that show all that. But as we talk about it, I really think it's beneficial that the public doesn't necessarily harp in specifically on the licenses as much. And then we'll absolutely put those in. So I'm gonna, by the time we get to the final language of the ordinance, we're gonna say you can do this type of activity inside this type of buffer or not. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
But if we had tried to pick from all the different, it just would have, I think, made it even.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I need it today. I'm just saying it's before we get to that point where we're deciding what is and what isn't allowed.
Sure.
What are the definitions of what we have, what cards do we have to play?
Right. Okay.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call up Mr. Tonin, please, Bill.
Hi, my name is Bill Tonin, and I live at 196 West Pine Avenue, just around the corner, above Cospa Coffee Company. My family owns Cospa Coffee. We've been in operation about 5 years. And some of the things I've learned sitting in the city council meetings and listening to some of the experts you all have brought in, some retail strategy type experts, I think 3 different groups of consultants to advise the city how to develop more economics and more activity in the city, bringing people more downtown and to benefit the whole city. Almost every consultant we've listened to here has said the importance of having large restaurants as being anchors and magnets to bring people downtown and to have a vibrant economic growth. They would talk about large restaurants, they would talk about large entertainment centers of sorts, they would talk about things like large grocery stores that can do revitalization because you're bringing people together. And I think we all would like to see more pedestrian centers and things like that. And I, for one, I'm a small business, and I need to tell you, we have 200 customers every single day, sometimes more, sometimes less. I've got 20 employees. I've got, let's see, $20,000 payroll every month. We didn't exist 5 years ago. We brought that to this town. So we're a very small business, and we've had an economic impact. Our community, our little downtown community, just around the corner, has benefited. The community's better. We do a lot of community events. So that's to say, I kind of thought this distance buffer thing, we have this area downtown which has already been granted, the distance restrictions are removed. But I rather thought the issue might look like kind of a Swiss cheese of there's a church here and a church here and a church here. We love our churches, but as I look at your map, which is brand new to me, I see that the churches overlap so much the central corridor of the city that it literally blocks out restaurant growth. And that's what we need to see in a vibrant city. So that kind of tells an interesting story. how do we get the next one in, and we're talking about the big chains. These are overlapping circles, so where would they go? So I would encourage consideration, as we're doing tonight, about allowing restaurants to expand in the downtown area along these corridors of growth that we all want to see. We want to see these restaurants grow, and yet the restrictions right now would point, this picture paints a kind of a story here, a picture that, well, I don't know where they would go. They'll go outside the city limits, I guess, out by the airport or something, I don't know. But now we're developing another business downtown, and it is a restaurant, and it's over 2,500 square feet, and it's over 150 seats. But actually, we did expand on it to make sure it was over 2,500 square feet. And it's going to be something that's going to employ twice as many employees. My payroll better be twice as much. And you know what we do? I pay 4 kinds of taxes. Before we ever make a profit, I'm paying 4 kinds of taxes. And property values are raising up as well. So I sure want to see more economic growth. Economics will bless us. It'll float all the boats in the harbor, especially in downtown. And we want to see more jobs downtown. I'm doubling down downtown, and anybody that's coming in with another business and a new business, these are investments being made, and they're multipliers. So job growth's important. People that are working hard, we all know the ethics of work, the value of work. They feel good, and they get in a lot less trouble than people that don't have jobs. So here we are. This was an interesting map. I really appreciate this discussion. I don't know if we want to, there's the distance restrictions, but there's also the growth of that downtown corridor. Might that be something that allows where if we want to plant more traffic, more restaurant growth in that area, that is one logical thing to consider. So on those 2 subjects, that's all my piece. Thanks.
Thank you. And Ms. Alex Barthet.
Just to wake everybody up.
All right, Alex Barthet, 203 Warrior Street. I'm the owner, my wife, of the Courthouse Suites. I appreciate the leadership of Councilman Rensick and the city manager to bring this topic up. And I'll say, first of all, as a property owner, the last thing I want is something that degrades, that's immoral and unethical, that is just not a value added to our community. But I think my perspective, as we focus on downtown, and certainly having a building right next to the courthouse, developing that is one thing. But I look at the economic vitality of this whole city. The question was, with all these maps, with this map and all of these circles, you know, where is business going to locate? And the answer is elsewhere. As your citizens continue to grow, the population in this Crestview, I'll use the word metropolitan area, grows, your citizens are clamoring for family-oriented, good activities that they could go, where you could take mom and the kids, you could go out and have a nice meal, you could have a drink, you could go do some amusement, you got a skate park, you got some other things that we're doing here. I think about with the road improvements, I think about with the bypass that's going in, the areas that's going to open up. I think it's important for this body. I look as a citizen that elects you guys, along the rest of the population, is that you're going to be the decision maker on what businesses are legal, ethical, moral, that's going to be here. And I think every citizen has a right to make input into that process, but ultimately I hold my elected officials accountable. So when we look at these different things, I would hope that the understanding is that when we allow, again, the focus is on restaurants, but when we allow a business to come in and they're successful, that sends a message out. When people look at this form of government, I think about when the courthouse was being discussed in this very chamber. Do we turn it this way or do we turn it that way? Do we follow the experts' guidance that you get the best land use in having it one way, or do you have some aesthetics and turn it another way for photo ops? So fortunately, we listen to the experts. I would hope that we would clarify the language. I think there's a lot of ambiguous terms in there. I think it's important, me as a developer of a piece of property, I want to know the rules of the game. I want to know where are the lines in the road, what are allowable or not allowable things. I don't want to waste my time, certainly waste capital to be doing things if we don't have the things in place. I think, I always, if any of you have talked to me, at times I'll look at Crestview and I think the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year, where is this community gonna be? And I think we have some outstanding opportunities. I think it's important upon this body to clarify the language, to make sure that we take a big picture perspective. We don't want things that, I don't want a DUI, I don't wanna have other activities that would degrade the city, that would put people in jeopardy. So Pastor, I agree with some of the comments you made. I don't want to go so far on the doom and gloom side. I think about Olive Garden. I see people bring their bags in when they go in to eat. I think the citizens are looking for places where they can go. They can have some quality of life after hours, and not have Crestview be the cash cow that's sitting here where people drive all over to Destin, over to Fort Walton Beach, God knows wherever else they go and spend their money, because that's where they could go and have a decent meal. That's where they could go and do some kind of fun activities. Okay, we're done. Let's go back to Crestview. You know, we have some great opportunities. We are not landlocked like down south. So I just, I don't know. I'm glad we're having this discussion. I think it's great that we have these discussions and work it out, and I feel confident we will. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Strom, you're up.
Stephen Strom, 139 Villacrest Drive. Like Alex, I want to thank you for bringing this up. I've been here 28 and a half years, and the thing I keep hearing all the time is there's nothing to do in Crestview. After doing some research like everybody else has, and after seeing the maps last Monday night at the town hall, we have these zones. They're restrictive. I think what we really need to look at is, I understand the need for certain things. I definitely don't want bars right next door to the residential areas. I understand the church's concerns. Bona fide restaurants, how we're going to define that, that's up to you. They can coexist. So where I'm going to say, short and sweet, do away with the local restrictions. Go as far as distance is concerned. Go with the state and county mandated requirements. Now we look at zoning and compatibility. Main corridors, north-south, Ferdon, State Road 85, east-west, James Lee, US 90. That's where I'm seeing a lot of things that could be put in, but they're within that 500-foot radius. We do away with that, we might get more growth. I understand where the pastor is coming from, but we need to think a little bit more too. So that's where I'm at. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Ms. Emma Winkler?
Good evening. My name is Irma Winkler. I'm at 333 Anderson Street. I just wanted to say I was at the town hall meeting last Monday. I am living here almost 20 years of my life. I've seen Crestview grow. I'm actually curious to see, do we have any numbers, statistics as to how much is being spent outside of Crestview?
Not readily available, but
Is that something that we can get though? Because I'm kind of curious to see what because of how everything is now, how it's affecting economy in our city.
what we can track is where do people go. So like when, because I've worked with several restaurants, some of the ones named today, to try to get them on some locations in Crestview. And so through the EDC, we can actually get these circles that show, like if your identification location is on your phone, it tracks where you go. So if you go to Walmart, you leave Walmart, and you go to Chick-fil-A, it can tell us all of that kind of stuff. I don't know that I can identify. I don't know that I can't, but I don't know that I can identify that when a person leaves Crestview, where do they spend their money. But I can tell you that they're leaving Crestview.
Where they're
I can tell you
right.
at 5 o'clock in the afternoon who's coming and who's going, not who specifically,
Right.
but the numbers.
Exactly. So I would kind of be curious to see that, but I feel that the exemption area should be extended. We have to think about growth. How much has Crestview grown in the past 20 years? How much are we anticipating Crestview to grow in the next 20 years? We have large military bases. We're having these military families come in. There's nowhere to sit down, eat. Maybe some people want to have a beer, wine, whatever the case may be. They're leaving Crestview, spending their money elsewhere. So I feel that exemption area should be extended just because of the growth of Crestview. As far as the buffer goes, I feel that as far as the bona fide restaurants, maybe no restrictions to them as far as the buffer. And then maybe for bars, I would say the 250 buffer. And the reason being is that way neither one or the other gets their way. It's meet you in the middle type thing. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience that'd like to speak to the council on this topic? Come on up, sir. If you would, come on up and fill out a card and give it to me afterwards. Just come on up and give me the card afterwards. Go ahead.
My name's Cody Moser. I'm the chair of the County Libertarian Party. I think it's really interesting that we've had this conversation tonight about, what kind of direction the city can go in. I would like to remind the city council, based on what Councilmember Hayes here said, that there is kind of a smart way to do this. You kind of think about, Crestview and its kind of growth in the future. I think about a lot of towns that are outside of these big, tourist complex areas that kind of build up their own sort of charm. And what you need for charm is you need a collection of things that people like that maybe they aren't getting in these other places. And so, talking about these kind of nice gastropub breweries or whatever, those sorts of things, is very different from a conversation about bars. And so I think that just keep that in mind, that you can, of course, say, let's have places with wine or beer. Let's maybe restrict the liquor if we don't want to have that. So, thank you.
Thank you. If you would fill that out and get the card out to me later on. Anybody else in the audience like to address the council?
Yeah, you got one in
Yes, ma'am, come on up.
My name is Hope Bell, and I live in Baker, Florida. I just recently retired from Rocky Valley Christian School, where I was a secretary there for the kindergarten. I know a lot of people think that Crestview should be growing these leaps and bounds, and of course, any city, we want the city to grow, but you have to admit that Destin is a draw because of the beach. People go down there to eat and to enjoy because of the beach, and we will never have the beach up here. But I know when I worked in Niceville, I had so many people that were moving up to this area because they wanted to be in the country. They wanted the peace, they wanted the quiet, and they wanted to be in the country. So each place has its drawing card. Up here, we live in the country. We have the blueberry farms, we have the strawberry farms, we have all the things that they don't have down in Destin. But Destin has the beach, and we will never have a beach. So Destin's going to always be a draw. Fort Walton Beach is also always going to be a draw card because they have the water. And so, if we think that, Crestview is going to be another Destin or a Fort Walton Beach, it will never be. That's just the reality. But my prayers is that when the council or the people make their choices, they're being honest about what they're really wanting to bring in. They're not trying to do something underhanded and bring in something that, they have an ulterior motive. And that's my prayer, is that that's not what it is, that they actually bring in really good restaurants, really good entities that really benefit the society and not something that will tear down the society. I worked in a school, and even it was a Christian school, we had a lot of people that were not church people, but they wanted their kids to have a good education. But I worked with a lot of kids who had broken homes. It was terrible. And so you see that you see the results when you work in a school with a large group of kids and little ones. I worked in the kindergarten department. A lot of them were, I worked right next, my office was right next door to a special needs class. And a lot of these kids, some of them were from alcoholic families. They had alcoholic syndrome, and so because they had special needs because of that. So you have to, when you see that kind of stuff, you know, you want to be protective of your society. And so that's my heart, that's my prayer, that when we choose things to bring in, it's a beneficial thing to the society. We have all kinds of areas. If people want to get alcoholic beverages, I mean, I could name a lot of areas, good and bad. Some are seedy, some are okay, that you can go to already in our community. So, you know, it's not like, you know, we're a dry community. So that's all I had to say, and my prayers is that everybody will be above board, and when they bring in things, they will be honest and not, you know, say one thing, because you know, when I'm like everybody else, all this language, most of it I don't know what you're talking about, but I do know that a lot of times people will have ulterior motives. They'll say one thing, and then when it's all said and done, it's another thing. But I'm trusting as my city council that y'all are going to be saying and doing what's best for our community all the way around, and to protect our children, to protect our communities, to protect those who go to church and who don't go to church, because even people who don't go to church want safety. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
He needs your card too when you finish.
Anybody else in the audience? Last call from the audience. Okay, thank you.
Any online questions?
No. No, we don't. No, if they want to address them, they need to come to city council meeting.
Mr. Mayor, one other question. Are we gonna have another workshop, or what's the schedule?
Okay, so it was my desire that we would walk through some different options tonight and try to figure out, you know, what direction we want to go in. And then I would draft up some language and bring it back. We can do it in the form of a workshop, or we can do it in a meeting. It completely, you know, it's up to you all where you want to take it from here. My thing is, you know, I'd like to have some discussion at the council level. I mean, if you guys are ready to have that conversation, you've heard from me, we've heard from the public. I'd like to see if there's any additional questions you have for me. If we think that there's a direction we want to go in, we can start looking at what that language would look like, nailing down the spreadsheet. You know, I'd like to put a timeline to it. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, go ahead,
Did that
Mr.
answer
Clark.
that question?
Tim, I'd like for you to comment on the scheduled meeting that we have Thursday night, because we're gonna get more input from our go-to-church people, the non-church people, but I think these people ought to have the opportunity to give their input before this council makes any decision. But an overall general discussion, heartbeat of this council should be done. But I have been off of this for ages and years. Let's let the people be informed first and hear the people.
Okay.
So comment on our meeting that we got scheduled for Thursday night.
May I respond to that? So I have a briefing set up for the Ministerial Association, I guess it is the group on Thursday night. However, you know, I have met with several, and I did inform them of this meeting as well. And I think one of them. Okay. Yeah. Mr. Strickland was here earlier tonight as well. So we definitely. I'll bring back a report from that meeting as well. But I think, you know, we need to have some conversation about what. Unless you all need to go away and think about it and come back.
Go ahead, Mr. LaBeouf.
No, I was gonna say, I for one, I'd like to think about it. I'd like to give it a little bit more time. I don't really want to necessarily rush into anything.
Sure.
I would like probably to recommend another workshop after you get your inputs from the ministers and have it open to the public again, so that we could have some open discussion. Maybe at that time we could start some frameworking. That's just my opinion. I'd like a little bit more time, but that's
sure.
me.
And so that I'm clear on what my expectation was for Thursday night's meeting was to go to that meeting with the Ministerial Association and explain what came out of this meeting.
Correct.
So I mean, that's why I'm interested to kind of hear, and I understand, I mean, we're not making decisions tonight anyways, it's a workshop.
Right.
But getting a general consensus of what the direction the council wants, plus, I mean, we do have some people who are interested or deciding whether or not to come in to the community, so. But it'd be hard for me to share with the Ministerial Association anything other than we're gonna go away and think about it.
Councilman Hayes was next.
Yes, thank you. Like I said, the main thing is the buffer. I think we all can realize it's gonna be the buffer. But just some things for our people to think about, for citizens as well as the council. And I just looked up right quick because I couldn't remember, and I know there's a more accurate, I think that Cal did of our demographics.
Right.
And not per race, but by age group. And you have to look at that factor. I think it might put an important thing in this. And this is from 2000. I'll have to, I'm sure there's latest things that you can find out. But at that time, population 29% was under 18. 8.10% was 18 to 24. 32.5% was 25 to 44. I'm not going to go down, but when we get to 65, it drops down 11.5%. So we're saying 11.5% of our people, I can almost know how they're going to think. I'm being honest with you. Does that factor play in there about that 18 to 24, that 25 to 44, and that 45 to 64%, which is way larger percent combined together than that young beginning and the well-seasoned individuals. So we have to look at that factor. I have to look at that factor because I think it plays a pretty important part of which way we're looking towards the city to grow. Nothing against our senior, I'm one of those seasoned individuals, not senior citizen. I'm a seasoned citizen. That means I've been around a little bit longer than a few other ones have. But the millenniums, where people know or not, those are the money spenders. They don't cook. They don't. They go out and eat.
I don't cook either.
They don't want to own a home because they think it's just a wasteless, unnecessary thing to own a home, and most of them are probably going to leave their jobs and move somewhere else in a few years. So you have to look at that factor. But they want to eat, and they want somewhere to go. And if they can't eat here, and a lot of them don't like to drive because they want car payments. We don't have a bus system. So it's a lot of outside factors that we all need to consider when we start looking at different things. I agree we need another workshop. I don't think we got some things accomplished today, but the main thing we really didn't hit, the buffer. That's it. We need to discuss the buffer. And then we can go into what can be within that, but until we determine in my opinion, what the buffer's gonna be and what we're gonna put in there, we are gonna be just going back and forth. That's just my opinion.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, certainly a workshop is a good idea. Absolutely. But I would like to come back with some ideas for you all. So if it pleases the mayor, what maybe I can do is walk us through some main points of this conversation. And let's just talk about those as just concepts. And then I can come back with different answers to that. So like, for example, we had one of the pastors got up and talked specifically about, look, I'm all in favor of restaurant, or pretty much said I don't have a problem with, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't have a problem with restaurants. That seems to be a general consensus.
Right.
So to me, I think that when we come back, it would be good for me to have language that at least deals with how we look at restaurants in relation to the buffer, right? And so, or at least I would like to be able to get to that point. So there's three really major things that are at conversation here. One is restaurants. That's the first tier, the easiest tier. The second one is, Miss Betsy, can you bring up the CRA map? I would like to hear, we didn't talk very much at all about this, if we're interested in considering any change in that border map. And if we are, what do you all think is a good idea with that? And then the third thing is bars as a separate conversation anywhere other than downtown. So the three main topics right now are, will we treat downtown different than the rest of the city?
What I wrote down.
Is that what you wrote down? See? So the three main issues are, first of all, how do we treat restaurants? Do we let us go pursue restaurants or not? Then secondly, do we treat downtown differently? And if we do, does it look like it does right now, or is it bigger? And then the third thing is, what do we do with the rest of the city as it relates to bars? So those are the three main topics. So if I can at least try to because if everybody here says that we all think you should take restaurants out of the buffer, then we'll work on that language. If not, then is that a fair? And then we come back and workshop, but it won't be fun. We can workshop it 100 times if you want. I just want to make progress each time we do.
Mr. Byrne?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Smith.
I think we owe that to staff to have at least somewhat of a direction. Even if we are going to have multiple workshops, we got to give them a direction to go, and they can't just be floundering. So if we have some items that we are on consensus with, it'll be best if we give that to staff now, so that as they come back to the next workshop, they're more prepared to brief us even more.
It also allows me to better brief the pastors as a group. That's something that, I don't want to keep briefing them, because I've already briefed, 3 or 4 of them, 5 of them, I guess I've met with. And I'm just saying, this is the issue. I would like to be able to say, okay, is there an issue? And then, so it just helps me to continue to move this process.
I have
Councilwoman Brown.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I finally got in. Gosh, I'm so proud. Now I forgot what I was going to say. No, I wanted to ask one thing is, will this affect any of the churches that are already in place? Like,
I'm not sure I follow the question.
we've already made an exemption for Mr. Patrick's, Mr. Jim's church over there, so it won't affect anything that we do.
Well,
now.
actually, you couldn't. They're allowed by right.
Their grandfather.
Yeah. It's not grandfather. We can't disallow them.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
We would have had to have created a
that's what I wanna
downtown
make sure.
district that didn't allow them, and then we would be in trouble anyway.
That's right. All right.
So
Well,
we couldn't
make
disallow.
sure they're going to be okay. Okay. So I am for just exempting the restaurants. Like they can put in a restaurant anywhere.
Okay.
I think that would open up all this land around that is closed down. I am not for putting the bars within the 500 foot of the schools or the churches. So.
Okay.
So I think we could leave the bar thing alone there, because we're going to I'm also for expanding the CRA, just expanding the district for that.
Okay.
So I'm trying to give you what
Yeah,
my
no, that's-
thoughts are on.
And we could
what
each
we're
do that.
having.
I mean, Mr. Mayor, we could each do that
Yeah.
if that's what
And-
you're looking for.
What was
That'll
the
help
other
you.
thing that
It
you
would help
had?
me, and then you can change your opinion. I mean, you guys are
Well,
elected.
somebody has. I also want to say I just thank all the citizens that spoke up, because we've got various points of view, and we're trying to take all of them into consideration so we can all work together as a community to move Crestview forward. We don't want to go backwards. We don't want to have a lot of caches, as we've already said. I hope we don't have any cash fans on the Facebook, but we don't want any of that kind of stuff. We want to have some place to go that we can eat. I eat a lot of restaurants and I don't drink, so I don't order the beer or the wine or whatever that's there, but I wouldn't be able to go to that restaurant if they couldn't sell alcohol, because they wouldn't be open. So, because that's where they make most of their money. The restaurant margin's very thin on the food, so that's how they get their revenue. And actually, if you want to look at it in another way, that's how a lot of the state gets their revenue, because we don't have a state income tax. So some of the revenue from alcohol comes from that. So the taxes.
Well, it would have to be 51% food if it's a bona fide restaurant.
Okay. Well, that's what I think we need to think about doing.
And it is 2,500 square feet.
Okay.
Food and soda.
Yeah.
All right. So
Councilwoman
that's.
Bucky had your hand up a minute ago.
I was just gonna say, if you want our feeling, I mean, I'll tell you what our feeling is.
Initials, yeah.
She kind of did too. I would willing to tell you my feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I think there should be no buffer on, and I don't know what the terminology of restaurant
Gotcha.
is, bona fide, full serve, I don't know, whatever it is you call it.
Okay.
That's what I asked earlier. I think there should be no
Fair
buffer restrictions on restaurants, so they can
Okay.
be next to a church if that's, okay.
Okay.
I think I'd like to expand the downtown exemption to the phase 1 and 2 of the CRA. Yeah, that part, I'd like to
Okay.
expand that exemption there, for whatever the reason is. And 2, I would like to reduce the buffer for liquor stores, bars, whatever, to 250 feet from the
Okay.
500 feet. So if you want my 3 points, my
Sure.
feelings on those 3 points,
Okay.
that's my feelings on those 3 points.
Okay. Do you want to go?
I would like to
Go
see
ahead,
the.
Councilman Renzo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to see the downtown adjusted to match CRA 1 and 2 as depicted
as
in
it
the
shows.
maps.
Okay.
To open up all Main Street. Exempt the restaurants. We need the restaurants. Now, as far as the buffer, there might be a different way to measure. There might be that is. I need to see how those things all really line up.
Okay.
I don't think the 500 is necessary, but I also do not think that we need to take it to 0. So I'd still like to see how that adjusts and how that opens up the commerce through our main corridors.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, we're competing with the coast. You know, our restaurants, if we don't have them up here, it's already been mentioned multiple times, they go to the coast.
Sure.
So we need them here. We need multi-generational entertainment, not just the entertainment for adults, not just the entertainment for kids, but something that spans the gap of all.
Okay.
Does that answer?
It gives me the position.
Can I say one thing just to keep in mind?
No, not right now, I'm sorry. I'll call on you in a minute, okay?
Because I want to hear it.
Let's
so
finish our discussion here, then I'll let you come back up. Did you have something? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Parker.
I'm next.
Yeah, you're next.
I thought you never asked.
You didn't have your finger up, Joe.
Number one, I want to let's keep Crestview, Florida as a family-oriented area, period.
Agreed.
And as the world knows, I have been contacted by many of our local citizens, cities, not only in our city, but our surrounding areas. And 90% knows how I stand. I am strictly opposed to alcohol, period. And I'd like to quote a statute why I say that. For I know people is listening out there, and Brother Shannon said a while ago, we got some old mossy backs here in this city, in this area. They watching us young people. I said young people. You get to know yourself. So listen a minute.
Just when I thought it couldn't get worse.
Number one, what I would like to see to happen, let's correct our verbiage mandated on our current orders that we have, period. Number one. Why you say that? Well, people don't know the status of alcohol. But now, listen, I have personally, and many in this room tonight, I know for a fact, have seen many lives disrupted and ruined because of alcohol. Why you say that, Brother Joe? Well, the current status today, let me tell you something. 3 million plus people die each year from alcohol. One person dies every 11 seconds in the United States of America from alcohol. 78% of the families in the United States of America or some of their family members has alcohol problems. So only 10% of the alcoholics in the United States of America will seek treatment after using alcohol for 10 years. What I would love to see happen here, get the input from the people first. First. I encourage another workshop, 1, 2, whatever it takes, period, on this. Let's correct our verbiage mandated in our current ordinance. They need a major overhaul, period. I am not against growth. I want to keep our economy number one. But let's satisfy our people. Now, why you say that? I am perfectly satisfied with the majority of our current orders, status quo. Why you say that, Brother Joe? Well, I have been asked, would you be in favor of amending existing orders? Yes, indeed, by all means. I request that. I urge that to happen. You got lots of responsibility, Tim.
Yep. We
place that on you. And we believe that right judgment and your right decision is going to come. We're looking forward for that. But am I in favor of that? And I would like to see after these ordinances is corrected, then let's establish in our city limits a red zone, a green zone for our future developments, whether or not a restaurant of any business, alcoholic, any business, you can build in this green zone, not in the red zone. Same way with churches as we got in place now, and let these people make a decision. Because people, we're at the greatest point that this city will ever have to make a decision to benefit us. Let's don't break our strategy. What's all these strategies meetings been in the last few weeks for if we don't implement them, put this together with everybody on the same page? Let's get on the same page. Offer it. We're here. So in determining these specific locations where a red zone or green zone can be, churches knows, school knows, businesses know. We resolve this problem economical. I believe that.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think I got the red zone, green zone part, which is kind of what the circles on the map do right now. What out of that, where did you have an answer on if it's a restaurant that serves alcohol too? Where should that be, in the red or the green?
There is ample space, acreages in the city limits now. And the forthcoming way these areas is annexed, and then we fixing to expand like you've never seen before. There will be ample spaces to locate any business, school, church, or what have you at a specified location. They know where they cannot build, period.
Okay.
But give them the opportunity to do that.
So my question then is the opportunity for a restaurant within, because here's the thing I want to make sure we all are on the same page about. We have 57 churches right now. We can have 58 tomorrow, 59, 60. It can continue to grow too. So the red and the green, based on this current methodology, will change, because we cannot say you can't put a church in. We can say you can't put we can't say you can't put a restaurant. We can say you can't serve alcohol. So that's just, am I making sense? So the question ends up being, does the restaurant that has the ability to serve alcohol fall within the buffer or not? Or do you want more information?
Let's correct our current ordinances first.
Okay, well,
Verbiage.
current ordinances will be no then, if we leave it like it is. Okay,
Do that
that's
first.
fine. Okay,
Step by step, people, we can resolve this.
okay. I think I got it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the feedback from our citizens as well as our council. I'm going to tell you where I'm looking at this now. I'm not saying it's in concrete, but I'm for expanding the CRA district. I'm in favor of the restaurants with or without alcohol. I think restrictions, the bars should have really as tight restrictions on them as possible that we can as legal, because I don't want to see the bars downtown. Restaurants that serve that. I haven't known too many people who can afford to get drunk in a restaurant, but maybe they can.
Right.
For as the buffer, I think I can compromise on the buffer. I think right now it's exceedingly too great to try to accomplish what we're doing, because it limits growth, because you're so close to a church. And I won't get into my speech, but churches, there's a thing about religion and politics that we have to really watch, and I really watch that, mixing religion with politics. But I respect both. And the thing that really bothers me is that we have the silent majority.
Sure.
We have people here, a few, not very representative of Crestview. The silent majority, what are they thinking? That's the ones we need to hear from. I know how the business owners think. I know how some of the pastors, I think, but the people that are majority of the citizens here, we're not getting feedback from them. So it makes it more difficult for us, because the silent majority is the one who's voting without us knowing it, and they're the ones who are going to make the complaint after, and they keep saying our voices aren't heard. Well, I think we give ample time for people's voices to be heard. If they don't want to be heard, there's always media things that they can do, and I would encourage them to do that. What we do concerning this could determine the future of Crestview years down the road, just like the highway affected us 20 years or 30 or 40 years ago. Nobody could see the future. The people that can see the future now are the ones who are billionaires, you know, because they can see those things. And I don't know any of them, but y'all. But it's possible that we can encourage people to get to that millionaire stage by encouraging them to bring their businesses here. And I wouldn't invest in a place where I know they're going to keep my hands clapped all the time. And I wouldn't want to be the only business in town. Because after a while, people will get tired of that. You know, you get tired of, I don't eat, that's me, I don't eat fast food that much. But after a while, I get tired of going and get a burger or whatever, you know. And keeping in mind, millenniums are the people that spend the money. Because they don't care nothing about money like we do. They make it and they spend it. And we have to realize the culture that we're bringing, that we're coming up. Like I say, next time you see a millennium, ask them the last time they cooked a meal.
Got it.
But there's a point behind that. So you know, you basically know where I feel right now, and
I think
everybody
so.
can come
Yes,
and
sir.
talk to me about it if they want to.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do, you know, what Councilman Hayes was just saying, you know, we do want to be transparent, even though
Sure.
we're at the end here, we should be wrapping up. The pastor did have an input. I want to give him an opportunity to come back up and make a brief statement if you want to do that, sir.
I can just stay right here if you want me to.
Well, we won't.
It's got to go on the
Yeah, we
record.
need to be on the microphone. Everybody can hear you.
Last time you cooked.
I cooked breakfast this morning.
My statement is not earth-shattering, but a lot of people don't realize that churches meet other than just Sunday mornings. We have Sunday night, Wednesday night, and other nights. So if you do away with a buffer altogether, in my church, you know, when they have football games, everybody parks mostly on our property. Our whole church is full of cars. You couldn't get anybody else in there. We have to direct traffic so they don't block, you know, the exits. And if you have restaurants right next door, you're going to have people having to come to church on Sunday night or Wednesday night or whatever night. And you're going to have conflict because sometimes you're going to have restaurant customers parking in the church parking lot and taking away parking places for the church members. You can have church members possibly going over to the restaurant to park, and that's going to take away parking places for the restaurant. So you got to have a buffer. And the second thing is also just to remind business owners that if you have a really good product, you don't need alcohol. Dizzy's is open 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and they don't serve alcohol. They're doing great. Chick-fil-A, they're closed on Sundays, and they're packed all the time, and they don't sell alcohol. So alcohol's not the answer to everything, but I think churches are. You know, if you're going to go to heaven, church is an important part of your life. If you're going to go to heaven, restaurants are not necessarily going to get you there. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. We really have to.
Yeah.
I'll listen to one more person, but we had the public comments. We had a lot of opportunity here.
I just got a little nervous. But I am just a normal citizen, and I should have said this earlier, but I got nervous up here. But I do want to say I don't agree with bars. I don't agree with, you know, you have to say restaurants close down around, 10? Bars can stay up until around, 4? And I just think it's going to cause more alcoholism, prostitution, things like that. And then you bring our officers in, they're going to have to do more patrolling, and it's going to put them at risk. And then that's where more tax dollars are going to go into. But I do want to say I am against, you said you wanted to hear from just citizens and not owners or pastors, and I do not want to see bars come into downtown Crestview.
Thank you. City Manager, would you
Close
tell
us
us
out.
if you have the guidance you need to go forward?
I believe I do. It seems to be the consensus is to take a look at the border, expanding the border in the downtown area. Really, the consensus seems to be leaving some form of a buffer as it relates to a bar, or bars in particular, and then obviously fixing the mislanguage inside of the ordinance. And it seems to be the consensus is to take restaurants and allow restaurants to go where they want to go. So if I may, just a quick liberty on this. you know, one thing Mr. Blocker said and Mr. Hayes said both is that we are at a pivotal time in Crestview, and I believe that to be true. And throughout our strategic planning, we have talked a lot about maintaining our character, while promoting growth and development. And I've used terms like smart growth and things like that. And the buffer system in and of itself is not necessarily bad. It's a good, safe, legal way to steer development in the types of businesses that we get. The problem is, the current problem with our code is the way that it's written makes it impossible for me to pull some of the things that do cross the borders of opinion in this room tonight. So I think, I honestly think that out of tonight's meeting, we've got a pretty good head start. We will schedule another workshop. I will brief the pastors on Thursday night. Y'all pray for me, and I'll be praying about it. And we'll come back at that next workshop with some ideas for you. Some of the statistics you asked for, we'll have a clear definition of the licensing. Mr. Holloway and I will be on the same page about it, and then we'll bring you back anything. So if you all think of something in between now and the next time we do a workshop, let me know and we'll be happy to produce it.
That's what I want to hear. We're going to have the other workshop, so that'll be good.
Yes, ma'am.
We set, at our first meeting tonight, we set the meetings for November and December. Do we want to talk about the workshop tonight? Because we're pretty much, we only have 2 meetings, one in November and one in December.
Yeah, and if I may,
Two council meetings. 2 council meetings.
2 council
this
meetings.
is
But we're, we set those because of holidays
Right.
and closings and everything else, so I don't know.
Workshops don't have to be on council nights.
No, they can be
I
whenever.
didn't know if you wanted to try to set that tonight.
I think that we'll be able to collect the data, and I know Mr. Blocker said he doesn't want to rush it. Mr. Buff said he doesn't want to rush it. I would agree with that. At the same time, I think we have a responsibility to some of our property owners who have people interested in their buildings to tell them yes or no. I mean, it may, maybe no. It doesn't sound like that, but it might be. And so I think we need to move along and answer the question and then move on with a good ordinance. So that being said, what are some dates that we could do a workshop?
We moved the meeting in November to the 18th because of Veterans Day. We could do it Tuesday night.
After Veterans Day?
Which is the 12th.
Okay.
That's almost 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks to pull some stuff together.
Yeah, well, 4 weeks would be plenty of time.
Yeah, the meeting, last week of October, we've got, besides Halloween, that's our CRA meeting that Monday night.
On which night?
The 28th you're talking?
28th is
That's the CRA and then the council meeting.
Yeah.
How long
Right.
would the CRA meeting be?
October.
Well, it's a workshop and
I was gonna say
No,
that's
we're
too
still in
far.
October.
All right.
I mean, we could do the short CRA meeting and postpone our CRA workshop until.
Well, I mean, this definitely would take precedent over that.
Yeah.
That's the grants conversation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we're not even sure we're gonna have time I'm bringing back information after this week. Trey will only,
Yeah.
I'll only have a
So,
couple of days.
so that's on the 28th
Yeah, so we could do our short CRA meeting and then our.
of October?
Yeah.
Does that work for the council members, Mr.
Works
Mayor?
great for me.
Is that enough time for you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in agreement for that. I
Yes.
personally don't want to see this
I don't either.
continue out like a lot of other government type activities that just keep going into the holidays and get drifted off into January.
Mr.
So-
Blocker, does that work for you? The 28th?
No, October.
October, November.
So
No,
that's
October.
already
October.
ready scheduled CRA.
Because
This
everybody's
one
already
is a
supposed
CRA
to be here
meeting?
anyway.
And instead of having a CRA workshop, we'll replace it with a council workshop. You can do that? Okay. Anybody object to that?
What time is the workshop scheduled for that
We
day?
had talked about if we, because I don't know with Stephen, if we have to have a short council meeting that night for nothing. Okay, so the CRA meeting is normally at 5. So CRA meeting will probably be very short, so I'd say 5:30, 6 o'clock
Okay.
for the workshop.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do another 5:30 workshop on the 28th,
Eight.
and we will have back for you. So what I will do then is I will draft language that addresses the things that are. I'll do it kind of like this, in that I'll have the strikes outs for the things that go away, and then I'll have different colored presentation for what we are suggesting. And I will bring back feedback from the Ministerial Association, and hopefully Mr. Strickland can be here to speak as well. Okay,
All right.
thank you. I appreciate everyone's patience, and I appreciate it.
All right, and I appreciate the public input. And and everything. I think it's a real good workshop, and we'll come back together. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Good reviews and
Yeah, we've got a lot done.